My name is Richard Hale. I'm 62 years old, and for nearly 3 decades I was the chief financial officer at Midwest Industries, one of Chicago's largest manufacturing companies. 30 years dedicated to spreadsheets, risk analysis, and decisions that moved millions of dollars. But my true passion was always my family. Laura, my wife, and our children Brian and Melissa were the center of my existence. Every bonus I received, every salary increase, everything was thought of first for them. When Brian wanted to get his MBA at Northwestern, I paid the $40,000 without hesitation. When Melissa decided to open that boutique in Lincoln Park, I financed the initial $100,000. For Laura, there was no limit. Trips to Europe, a new Lexus every year, our dream house in Winnetka. I was always a reserved, analytical man. At the company, they called me the silent calculator. My calm demeanor was my trademark. In the final months before retirement, however, something changed at home. Laura seemed distant, always on the phone whispering conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. Brian and Melissa started asking strange questions about inheritance, about my investments, about what would happen after. If you enjoy cold revenge stories and plot twists that keep you hooked, subscribe to the channel now. We have 2 original stories daily, and each one is more impactful than the last. The day of my retirement party arrived. We organized something simple in our backyard, just family and a few close friends. I was genuinely happy, thinking about the plans Laura and I had made. Traveling the country in our new RV, visiting the grandchildren we hope to have soon, maybe a little house in Florida for the winters. It was in the middle of the party that everything collapsed. Laura approached me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She carried a manila envelope in her hands. "Richard," she said, her voice as cold as a Chicago winter, "I have a retirement gift for you." I opened the envelope. Divorce papers. My vision blurred for a moment. I read the first lines. Irreconcilable differences. Division of assets. Alimony. Laura leaned in and whispered in my ear, "I don't want to take care of an old retiree, Richard. You understand, don't you?" I looked at her, then at our guests. That's when I saw it. A man I didn't recognize was standing near the gate, watching the scene with a smug smile. My eyes turned to Brian and Melissa. They didn't look surprised. In fact, they were exchanging glances with each other, as if sharing a secret. "You knew," was all I could say. Brian shrugged. "Dad, you have to understand our position. Mom deserves to be happy, and we need to think about the future, too." Melissa nodded. "Your investments, the company, all of this, it's a lot to manage. Maybe it's better to leave it in the hands of those who understand it better." In that moment, everything became clear. It wasn't about Laura's happiness. It was about money. My money. They thought that at 62, I would be easy prey, the old retiree who would sign any paper, who would divide everything without question, who might even die conveniently in a few years, leaving them with the complete inheritance. But they didn't know Richard Hale, the CFO. They only knew Richard Hale, the dedicated husband and father. I folded the papers calmly and put them in my pocket. "All right," I said simply. "I'll sign." The party continued, but I was mentally absent. I watched Laura laughing with the strange man. I saw my children whispering among themselves, probably dividing my fortune before I even signed the papers. They didn't know that in the last 5 years, following my always cautious CFO instincts, I had substantially diversified my investments. Offshore accounts, investment funds under other names, stocks in companies they never dreamed existed. 3 days later, I signed the divorce papers. I divided the visible assets exactly as Illinois law required. Laura got the house, half of the joint accounts, the standard alimony. The children received some company stocks and access to a fund I had created years before. They thought they had won the lottery. They didn't know they had just lost the game. Day after signing the papers, I did something no one expected. I disappeared. Not literally, of course. But to Laura, Brian, and Melissa, it was as if I had evaporated from the face of the earth. I canceled my phone, closed my social media accounts, and moved to a small cabin I bought hastily in rural Oregon near Bend. A 10-acre property in the middle of nowhere. No nosy neighbors. No questions. They tried to contact me, of course. In the first days, my old phone rang constantly. Desperate messages from Laura. "Richard, we need to talk about the alimony details." Brian left voicemails. "Dad, where are you? We have some questions about the company funds." Melissa was more direct. "Daddy, this is ridiculous. You can't just disappear." But I could, and I did exactly that. Summer, fall, winter. The seasons passed in absolute silence. While they searched for Richard Hale, the wounded and betrayed man, I was transforming into something completely different. My experience as a CFO hadn't disappeared with the divorce. In fact, for the first time in decades, I could apply it entirely for my own benefit. I set up a small office in the cabin, 3 monitors, satellite fiber optic connection, and all the tools a professional investor needed. I started small, day trading, emerging market analysis, investments in tech startups. My advantage was obvious. 30 years reading balance sheets, identifying solid companies and separating the wheat from the chaff. In 6 months, I had doubled my initial capital. In a year, I had tripled it. Cryptocurrencies were booming at that time, and my conservative analysis kept me away from the traps that destroyed so many amateur investors. While others lost everything on meme coins, I built solid positions in blockchain companies with real fundamentals. But money was only part of the equation. The real project was Richard Hale 2.0. I began taking care of my health seriously. Gym every morning, hikes on Oregon trails, balanced nutrition. At 63, I was in better shape than at 50. I let my beard grow, bought clothes that actually pleased me instead of those corporate suits I wore for decades. I learned to play guitar, something I always wanted to do but never had time for. And it was on one of those morning walks that I met Clara. She ran a small bookstore in Bend, a 52-year-old woman with natural gray hair and a smile that lit up any room. Also divorced, childless, but with a genuine passion for life that I hadn't seen in years. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours, talking about books, travel, dreams we had abandoned along the way. "You have an interesting energy," she told me on our 3rd date. "You seem like someone who went through something difficult but came out stronger on the other side." She wasn't wrong. Clara and I got married at a small courthouse in Bend after 8 months of dating. Nothing extravagant, just the 2 of us, 2 witnesses, and the certainty that we had found something real. 6 months later, we adopted Lily, an 8-year-old girl whose biological parents had lost custody due to neglect. Seeing Clara caring for Lily, seeing the pure love in that child's eyes, showed me what I had lost in Chicago, but also what I had gained by losing it. Meanwhile, my investments continued growing exponentially. 2 of the startups I financed were acquired by Silicon Valley giants. My stock portfolio was generating monthly dividends that exceeded my old CFO salary. I bought land, commercial properties, stakes in private equity funds. Within 3 years, my fortune was larger than it had been during my entire marriage to Laura. But most importantly, I was genuinely happy. Lily called me Daddy without hesitation. Clara looked at me every morning as if I were the best part of her day. We had built a simple but rich life. Family dinners, weekend trips to the mountains, evenings playing Scrabble while Lily did homework at the kitchen table. It was in the 4th year of my new life that the first sign arrived. My lawyer in Chicago called me. "Richard, your ex-wife is trying to locate me. She wants to renegotiate the alimony terms. Apparently, she's facing financial difficulties." Financial difficulties. How interesting. "And my children?" I asked. "They also made contact. Brian mentions problems with his business. Melissa, well, the boutique closed last year. She's asking for financial advice." I smiled for the first time in 4 years, thinking about my former family. "Dr. Peterson," I said to my lawyer, "please inform them that Richard Hale does not wish to be contacted. If they insist, you have authorization to take appropriate legal measures to ensure my privacy." "Understood." "But Richard, they seem genuinely desperate." "I know," I replied calmly. That's exactly how I planned it. It was time for the final phase of my plan to go into action. They had discarded me because they thought I had no more value. Now they would discover exactly how much I was worth, and how much it cost to lose me. The following months brought a symphony of desperation that I observed from a distance, like a conductor watching his most complex composition being performed perfectly. My lawyer, Dr. Peterson, became my source of information about my former family's collapse. "Richard," he called me on a winter morning, "I need to update you on the situation in Chicago. Your ex-wife Laura is in serious trouble. Apparently, the other man, Marcus, I discovered his name was, had revealed his true nature a few months after my disappearance. He wasn't the successful businessman he pretended to be. In fact, Marcus was a professional con artist who had identified Laura as an easy mark, a newly divorced woman with access to a substantial amount of money. He convinced her to invest in his fictitious import company. $200,000 from the asset division, plus $50,000 she had taken from the emergency fund I left for her. When Marcus disappeared with the money, Laura discovered that the company didn't even legally exist. The documents were forged, the office was rented month to month, and Marcus Johnson wasn't even his real name. She's living in a one-bedroom apartment in Cicero now, Peterson continued. Lost the house in Winnetka. Couldn't pay the mortgage without your supplementary alimony. Ah, yes, the alimony, another aspect of my careful planning. When I signed the divorce papers, my official income was only my base salary from Midwest Industries. All my more substantial investments were structured through holdings and trusts that weren't considered regular income. This meant my alimony was calculated on a much smaller base than Laura expected. She had planned to live comfortably on the $1,200 monthly I was required to pay, plus the returns from the investments she had won in the divorce. But the investments she received were precisely those I knew were about to depreciate. Midwest Industries stock, for example. I knew the company was facing competitiveness problems that would become public only months after my divorce. The stock lost 60% of its value in the first year. The other investments I left for division were equally problematic. High-risk funds that looked solid on the surface, but which I knew were artificially inflated. "And your children?" I asked. Peterson sighed. Brian invested heavily in a cryptocurrency startup that promised to revolutionize digital payments. He put in almost everything, the money from the asset division, a loan against his house, even his own children's college fund. The company was a Ponzi scheme. He lost $400,000. Brian was always impulsive. Even as a child, he wanted the fastest results, the most obvious shortcuts. I tried to teach him about patience and careful analysis, but he always preferred to trust his own instinct over sound financial education. Now that instinct had cost his own family's future. And Melissa? The boutique went bankrupt last year. Apparently, she expanded too quickly, opened 2 additional stores without sufficient capital to sustain the growth. When the pandemic hit, she was paying rent for 3 premium locations in Lincoln Park without enough revenue to cover the costs. She's in debt for approximately $200,000. Melissa, my daughter who always wanted everything of the best and most expensive. I had financed her first boutique precisely because I knew she didn't have the temperament to build a sustainable business. She saw only the glamour of being an entrepreneur, not the brutal numbers that determine success or failure in the retail market. They're looking for you more urgently now, Peterson continued. Laura called my office 17 times last week. Brian sent a 3-page letter explaining his situation and begging for a conversation. Melissa is offering apologies and promising she'll never again be part of any conspiracy against you. Conspiracy. What an interesting word. They were finally admitting that the retirement party had been a setup. Richard, they're really desperate. Laura mentions she's considering filing for personal bankruptcy. Brian might lose his house. Melissa is living with her mother in the apartment in Cicero. I heard all this while watching Clara and Lily playing in our yard. Our new house, actually. A 600-acre ranch I bought the previous year, with a view of the Cascade Mountains. Lily was teaching Clara how to ride horses in our small stable. Their laughter echoed through the valley. "Dr. Peterson," I finally said, "they can keep trying to contact me, but my position remains unchanged. Richard Hale does not wish communication with these people. I understand, but Richard, what if they try to locate you physically? Laura mentioned hiring a private investigator." I smiled. "They're welcome to try, but they'll discover that Richard Hale from Chicago, Illinois, no longer exists in public records. The man they're looking for disappeared 5 years ago." It was true. I had officially changed my residence to Oregon, reorganized all my businesses through complex corporate structures, and even altered some details of my civil registry. Not illegally, of course. Just taking advantage of the complexities of the American legal system that I knew very well after 3 decades as a CFO. "But Richard, they're your family." "No," I replied, watching Lily run toward the house shouting, "Daddy, Daddy, look what I learned." "My family is here. Those people in Chicago are just an expensive lesson I paid about trust and loyalty." It was time to send a final message to close this chapter of my life forever. It was on a spring morning, exactly 5 years after my retirement party, that I decided to definitively close this chapter of my life. Clara was making pancakes in the kitchen while Lily practiced piano in the living room. Classical music echoed through the house. Chopin, one of the pieces she was learning for the school recital. I was watching this perfect domestic scene when my phone rang. Dr. Peterson once again. "Richard, I need to inform you about a development. Laura is in the hospital." My first reaction was nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no concern. Just a curious emptiness where 3 decades of marital emotions used to exist. "What happened?" I asked out of politeness. "Apparently, she had a severe anxiety attack. She's being treated for depression and extreme financial stress." Brian called my office crying. "Richard, literally crying. He's asking for just 5 minutes of conversation with you. He says he needs guidance on how to save his family from complete bankruptcy." I looked at my own family. Clara smiled at me from the kitchen. Lily waved from the music room. 5 years ago, I was just a man who had dedicated his entire life to people who saw me as a walking ATM. Today, I was a father, a husband, a mentor to Lily, a real partner to Clara. "Dr. Peterson, I want you to send a letter to each of them. The same letter. Can I dictate now?" "Of course." I took a deep breath. "Dear Laura, Brian and Melissa, the man you discarded 5 years ago no longer exists. What remains has not forgotten. You judged me as a worthless old retiree. You have now discovered how much that miscalculation cost. There will be no second chance, no reconciliation, no financial rescue. You made your choices based on greed and convenience. Now live with the consequences. Sincerely, Richard Hale." "That's it?" Peterson asked, surprised. "No, include a photo." That afternoon, Clara, Lily, and I posed for a professional photo in front of our house. Not the initial cabin, but the 600-acre property I bought in the 3rd year of my new life. A stone and wood mansion with panoramic views of the mountains, stables in the background, the Tesla Model S parked in the circular driveway, and the small plane I bought for our weekends in Seattle. In the photo, I wore jeans and a flannel shirt, clothes I would never have considered in Chicago. Clara was radiant in a simple summer dress. Lily held our golden retriever, Duke, whom we adopted the previous year. We were all genuinely smiling. On the back of the photo, I wrote by hand, "The Hale Family, Oregon 2024. Built on love, not money." 3 weeks later, Peterson called me again. "Richard, your letter caused impact. Laura tried calling my office 46 times on the first day. Brian sent a 12-page response that I honestly couldn't finish reading. It seems more like a confession of guilt than a letter. Melissa showed up personally at my office in Chicago." "What did she say?" "That you had won. That they finally understood it was never about money for you, but about respect and loyalty. She wanted me to convey that they are proud of the man you've become. But they know it's too late." Proud. What fascinating irony. "Did she say anything else?" "Yes, she asked if you were really happy. When I showed her the photo, she was silent for almost 5 minutes. Then she said, "He looks 20 years younger. I never saw him smile like that when he lived with us." Melissa was always the more perceptive of the two children. Apparently, she had finally understood that the man they knew in Chicago wasn't really me. It was just a version of me molded by decades of responsibilities and expectations that were never reciprocal. "Richard, may I ask a personal question?" "Sure. Do you feel any satisfaction from their suffering?" I considered the question carefully. Satisfaction? No. Relief? Absolutely. For 5 years, I carried anger and betrayal like a stone in my chest. Today, that stone has disappeared. Not because they are suffering, but because I built something better. It was true. Watching their collapse didn't bring me joy. It brought closure. Proof that I had made the right decision to disappear, to rebuild, to choose genuine love over toxic obligation. Is there any chance you'd reconsider? Even though they were wrong, they are your biological family. Dr. Peterson, family isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by daily choices of love, respect, and loyalty. Clara chooses to love me every morning. Lily chooses to call me daddy. I choose to protect and nurture these people. That's family. And Laura, Brian, and Melissa? They chose to see me as a financial resource to be exploited. They chose to conspire against me. They chose to discard me when they thought I had no more value. Those were also family choices, just not the kind that builds, but the kind that destroys. 6 months later, I received a final update from Peterson. Laura had moved to a government-subsidized assisted living facility. Brian got a job as an accountant at a small company in Rockford, slowly rebuilding but never recovering his previous standard of living. Melissa went back to college at 42, studying to become an elementary school teacher. They survived. That was all I wanted to know. Today, 2 years after sending that letter, I wake up every morning in a house full of laughter, plans, and genuine love. Lily, now 15, is applying to universities, with a full merit scholarship she earned on her own, because Clara and I taught her that real achievements come from effort, not inheritance. Clara expanded her bookstore to 3 Oregon cities and is considering writing a novel. Me? At 67, I'm happier than I ever imagined possible. My fortune continues to grow, but now it serves a different purpose, not to impress or support people who see me as a means to an end, but to build a real legacy with people who love me for who I am, not what I own. Sometimes Clara asks if I miss my previous life. I always answer, "You can't miss something you never really had." The betrayal by Laura, Brian, and Melissa wasn't just the end of a marriage and family relationships. It was the birth of the real Richard Hale, a man who learned that the greatest revenge isn't destroying your enemies, but building a life so fulfilling that they become irrelevant. They taught me that love cannot be bought, but it can be lost. That family is not a right, but a privilege, and that sometimes the best response to betrayal is not anger, but the indifference that comes from a genuinely well-lived life. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, and leave your comment telling us what you thought. And if you're not yet subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the bell icon to receive notifications of new stories like this one. Thanks for watching and see you next time.